This video is aimed at students in Scotland studying towards SQA English in either higher or National 5. Specifically, it's about the critical essay and how to write a critical essay within exam conditions, exam techniques. What we'll be talking about here can be applied to any critical essay in any of the genres, but the specific examples will focus on the prose novel To Kill a Mockingbird, which I'm currently teaching at higher level. The techniques can be applied to both National 5 and higher, and any distinctions that need to be made I will make in the video. In order to do well at critical essay, you have to understand your text. You should be studying your text in class. You should have studied your text and have done plenty of work with your class teacher on this. But a useful tool for any text, a critical essay, is a sequencing timeline. This can help you to understand what happens when and to who, and it makes planning and writing your essay much easier. So a sequence task will appear on the next slide, but really it's about understanding what happens, the order they happen in, and gathering your evidence well in advance of entering that exam room. The task is quite straightforward. It's to create a table or list of bullet points with sub-bullet points to show the order of events, along with some notes and quotes in response to those. You can see on the right hand side here just a couple of quick examples to get you started. In chapter 1, when Jem and Scout Finch first meet Dill, a little quote there to show the introduction, and a comment for myself that Jem and Scout meet him in the collared patch and that Dill is a symbol of childhood. So here we've got a reference to the technique symbolism, just to remind me that that is what's going on with this particular character. Another one that I've added there is from chapter 6, when Jem, Scout and Dill try to break in or try to sneak into the Radley's yard in the middle of the night, and they get shot at by Mr. Nathan Radley. Got the quote there, and we've got a brief explanation of the quote, or a bit of understanding here. It's to show the presence of prejudice, that he would quite happily open fire with his shotgun, believing there to be a black person or a Negro in his garden. So if you don't have one of these, you should pause the video now and complete a sequencing timeline. If you're struggling with this, do pop onto Google. There are plenty of timelines around many of the major texts that you're likely to be studying, so have a look at those, get yourself a timeline. It may be quite long to begin with, but once you start to trim it down and get familiar with the key events, it will be very useful to you. So spend a bit of time getting your sequencing timeline right. You can pause the video now. Now that you've understood the order of events and gathered some quotes and explanation for your novel, you need to start planning and thinking about the timing of your critical essay. Normal time for the critical essay is part 2 of the second paper, which is the critical reading paper. It's 90 minutes long, standard time, so you've got roughly 45 minutes for the Scottish text section and roughly 45 minutes for the critical essay section. If you can get through the Scottish text section quickly, then you'll have a little bit more time for the essay, but you should plan to have 45 minutes on your essay. And a suggested breakdown of that time is here. Spending the first 5 minutes reading the questions, picking the one that you like the best and writing a plan for that question. You would then spend about 3 minutes writing your introduction, which you should have already prepared. Most of that will be done already. It's a good starting point. Look at my other videos for advice on how to do that. You will then have around about 8 minutes for each of the 4 main body paragraphs, if you're going through 4 main body paragraphs here, which would cover plenty of points. Final 3 minutes for a conclusion, which again you can practice in advance to an extent. There are tips and tricks for that in other videos on my site. And then a final 2 minutes at the end to proofread. Now, I'm not talking about proofreading every single sentence and checking for spelling and punctuation. Yes, you should be able to spot these things if there's any obvious mistakes, but really it's once you finish writing a paragraph, go back and read over that paragraph and make sure that it makes sense in response to the question that you're answering. It's easy to miss out words when we're writing at speed, and sometimes the omission of a single word can change the meaning of a sentence or can fail to get our point across. So make sure you do double check that your paragraphs make sense. It's therefore important not to skip the planning stage so that you know what your order of events is going to be. So do take that 5 minutes to plan at the beginning of your essay. Here's an example from To Kill a Mockingbird using the question about social or moral prejudice as an example. This is a good question for this novel as there's a lot of prejudice taking place. We might look at paragraph 1 being early on in the novel, say chapter 6, that incident in the Radley's yard where Nathan Radley shoots at the children, believing them to be black people or Negroes who have broken into his yard, and he's quite happy to do so, knowing that that is accepted in that time period. So an example of that kind of prejudice there. Paragraph 2, we go a bit further into the novel in chapter 9 when Scout finds out that Atticus is taking the case of Tom Robinson. She questions why he is defending a black person using this language here, which we know is derogatory, but she doesn't really understand the impact of that language. Atticus does correct her at this point in time, but it still shows the casual prejudice of the time period. The third paragraph, we can look at chapter 12, when Calpurnia takes the children to her church, and another member of the church community, Lula, confronts them, asking why Calpurnia has brought white children to the black church. This helps to understand that the prejudice is not one-sided. It's not just about white people being prejudiced towards black people, but there are members of the black community who are also guilty of being prejudiced towards white people. That leads us to paragraph 4, final chapter, chapter 30, when Heck Tate, the local sheriff, covers for Boo Radley's killing of Bob Yule. He explains that he's been doing this job for a long time. He understands what's supposed to happen, but part of him wants to change things. He wants to go against tradition, not just the tradition of the town, but also in this case he's going against the law. He's essentially covering up a murder, but it gives us a glimpse that change is possible if the right people are willing to stand up and be counted. As you become more confident in your planning process, you will get much quicker at writing down your bullet points. You can see here I've just written P1 for paragraph 1. Quick explanation of what I want to talk about. It's the Radley Yard shotgun, and now you know what that is referring to. I've got a brief version of the quote that I want to use, in particular the shotgun shattered the neighbourhood, to get a sense of sound there. And I've listed here characterisation / setting that it is okay to shoot at Negro. That's the point that I want to make, but it's being made through the characterisation or the setting of this time period. Paragraph 2, Scout confronts Atticus, and this is the characterisation of Scout using these words as a form of casual prejudice. And we continue through our plan much quicker once we get more confident with it. And you'll notice here that I'm labelling each point now with a relevant feature of prose fiction, so plot, character, setting, key incident, turning point, all this stuff that you should be studying, getting to know through your classroom lessons, familiarity with your genre, different for drama but different for film, but in this case the prose features. When it comes to writing the actual main body paragraphs, there's a number of different ways to learn how to write an effective paragraph. You might use PEA, PEA, PEAL, PAIR, PCQAE, whatever it is you have learned, whichever one you have become more familiar with, that is the one that you should practice. Regardless of that, each paragraph covers a different moment in the story and should include, broadly speaking, a brief explanation of the moment, why it is important to your overall argument. This is part of your plan. How does it connect to the question? You should also include evidence, at least one piece of evidence of a feature from your chosen genre. So prose fiction, you'll be looking at plot, character, setting, key incidents, turning points, climax, things like that. Drama, you'll be looking at stage directions. Film, you're looking at lighting and sound perhaps, and you should include analysis of your chosen features. You then want to give an explanation of how this feature helps you to understand your key theme or message, remembering that we're looking at the incidents as well as the novel as a whole. It's worth noting here that you can use more than one piece of evidence per paragraph, but each paragraph should only cover one main point. So you might do point, evidence, analysis, evidence, analysis, evidence, analysis. You've got lots of bits of evidence for that one point, but you don't want to have more than one point in a paragraph. Task for you to practice this. Remember from our suggested timings, you will have around 8 minutes to write each paragraph. So what I would suggest you do is set a timer for 8 minutes and try to write one complete paragraph around any key moment from your text. So look at your sequencing timeline Pick one moment, climax, turning point, anything else that happens, and try to write a complete paragraph with evidence, analysis, and all the other stuff within 8 minutes. Don't worry if it takes more than 8 minutes initially. If you do find that you're struggling with time, you can try it without the timer. Take as long as you need to come up with a selection of good paragraphs. So do one initially and then check that it's okay, check that you're happy with it. Maybe get your teacher to check it. Make a few good paragraphs and write them onto revision cards or print them out on bits of paper. Stick them somewhere that you can see them so that you're looking at them every day. You're becoming more familiar with good paragraphs, memorizing them to an extent, and then regularly challenge yourself to try and write one out from memory until you're able to do so comfortably within that 8-minute window. So aiming to complete a paragraph within 8 minutes. You can pause the video now. As you become more confident with the basic structure of paragraphing, you can start to play around with it to suit your own writing style. You wouldn't necessarily need to do the evidence followed by the analysis, followed by the evaluation, followed by the link to the question. You could move these around a little bit, presenting a couple of bits of evidence or putting your evaluation in a little bit sooner to suit the way that you write. So find your writer's voice and apply it here. It's okay to follow the basic structure, but the better essays will find their own way of expressing this information. You want to make sure that each paragraph not only connects to the theme or message that you have identified, but also please remember to answer the actual question. It's not just about regurgitating practiced paragraphs, it is about connecting these to the question that you have chosen. So if you're talking about this question of social or moral prejudice, you would identify that the characterisation of Nathan Radley highlights the social prejudice towards black people and challenges us to question our own actions towards others. There, underlined, we have the question, the part from the question about social prejudice, and in bold, we have the theme or message that the author is trying to get us to think about. A lot of good essays lose marks for not answering the question, being relevant to the task, is the words that they use on the SQA marking instructions. If you're not relevant to the task, you will be lucky to score 9 out of 20 on this essay. So make sure that all your paragraphs, your entire essay, is answering the question. And as you're doing so, try to use discourse markers to signpost your writing. So guide your reader through your marker, through your thought process, using these kind of phrases. The author uses the setting to highlight, or Scout's behaviour helps us to understand, or the presence of the whole community reveals. The language here helps us to understand. The characterisation of this character shows us or tells us. So using these words and these phrases to show that you've understood what's going on and guiding your marker through the process. You should now be familiar with how to plan an essay and construct your main body paragraphs. In order to write a complete essay, you will need to add an introduction and a conclusion, and there are other videos on my page with advice and help with these, so do check those out. Remember, practice makes permanent. If you practice the wrong method of doing something, it will stick. So get it right first. Take your time to get it right first before you memorise the wrong way of doing something. Have a teacher or a peer check it, making sure that you know what you're doing is correct before you get into the practice